Hello, everybody. How you doing? As you can see, I've done some adjustments here because I'm moving everything around. Uh, anyway, it's a little different. Hold on, let me drop this a bit. Just a little bit. Come on. Okay. Sorry, my desk got moved. Computer got re-angled. Okay, hi everybody. So usually this was supposed to be scheduled for Monday. He's getting used to this. Now I still got a picture of Jesus up there. Always keep getting this wrong. And then over here, further is that's Saint George. And yes, the dragon slayer. As you can see him killing a dragon. Sometimes they think it's Saint Michael the Archangel, but Saint Michael doesn't ride around on a horse because he's got wings. Okay, so it's Saint George. And that strange creature up here in the corner is not a creature. It's from Nicaragua. It's a type of costume that they wear during some of their dances in order to basically it's to make fun of the Spanish. Uh, it's a figure of a horse, and of course it looks like a man with a horse's head. Some people thought it was some kind of demon or something, but no, it's one of the costumes they wear when they do dances and recreating the history of the country. The experience of being invaded. So that's one of the things they use. So it was a gift from Father Alejandro Garcia. Anyway, so the Gospels is what we're going to talk about today. Okay, um, I mentioned before in the last meeting that there's more than just. Oh my goodness! I'm sorry. I'm just not happy with this angle. That's a little better. Okay. I mean that there's four gospels, but there were many more that were written. Last video I mentioned some, some of their names, and you can find them in book editions. They printed them out again now. They're popular again because people have gotten to a deeper study of the history of the sacred scriptures and how they came to be, and then realizing that there were a lot of writings, and we found them. Some we kept alive. We just didn't publish them. That was mainly the idea of that, why give people information they didn't know how to process. That was our attitude. When even we who were the ones who studied the Bible and, were the priests and everything, sometimes we didn't understand what they were. And we've done a lot of misinterpreting. We're at a time now where things are really out there in the open. You can really do your own studies. You can see things. You can do a lot of historical studies, etc. So this is a really good time to be studying scripture, to looking things up, because it's not just what it says that when you read a line in the scripture, you go, okay, there's a lot of stuff that you can see and understand in the background. And this is one of the things I want to talk about with the Gospels. It's putting yourself in the context of Jesus Christ speaking almost 2,000 years ago, right? And what he was, what they were living, and what he was. Some things he makes references to certain things. He especially likes to repeat a lot of the words from the Old Testament, from the book of Deuteronomy and Exodus, Leviticus as well. He'll bring up certain phrases. We think, wow, this is wonderful new teaching by Jesus, when it's really, he's just repeating the old stuff, but he's putting it in to their time and place and giving it an extra meaning or a deeper way to practice certain things, like the simple one, right? Yeah, a lot of people, when I ask them, what's the greatest commandment? They say, well, you shall love the Lord. That's the first commandment. the Ten Commandments, they almost always say you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your strength, with all your mind. And no, that's not the first of the Ten Commandments. The first of the Ten Commandments is, you know, there's only one God. You shall have no other gods before you. Simple as that. But it's not that one. He's referring to, I mean, that the phrase I said before about you loving God above all things, and then we say, and your neighbor as yourself, that comes from the book of Deuteronomy. And it was actually sort of the commandment that Abraham received and was teaching before Moses received the Ten Commandments. So for a long time, the basic law of the Jewish people, it wasn't all of these rituals, and it wasn't the kosher laws of how to clean things and how not to eat certain types of food, etc. Um, the way of Abraham was to love God with all your mind, with all your heart, with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself, right? That was basically what Abraham was teaching his people to live. And he didn't have a set of written rules about that. It was just, this is how you do it. And the thing is, who did they consider to be their neighbor? And it was pretty much restricted to the tribe. It wasn't everybody. And then you have Jesus, who wants you to now see that the neighbor is anybody you run into in this world is your neighbor. Then you have the parable of the Good Samaritan, right? Where people who, a guy who nobody likes, he's from Samaria. No, I'm sorry, this guy, you have a Jewish man, obviously wealthy, falls in with the wrong crowd, is left for dead. And, his fellow countrymen, a Levite, and then a priest. What's the difference? The Levites are the priest, but a Levite is the whole tribe. The priests are the ones who actually did the sacrifices in the temple, and they're the ones who were on duty. So they're basically from the same group, but they both just walked by him because he's a bloody mess, and you can't touch the blood of another person, especially we don't know who this is. He's not part of us. He's not of our tribe. He's not a Levite. He's not of the family, right? So I said, so they just let him get there to die. And then a Samaritan, who's not considered part of the Jewish people, and in fact would be hostile to the Jewish people because Samaritans are in the north. It's kind of what we have now, what they have nowadays, Samaria, where the Palestinians have been living. It's those people, those descendants. Now, they were Jewish, but they were Jewish, but they also mixed with the local populations more, and they were part of the kingdom, and then they lost their kingdom. So Samaria was sort of just a renegade backlands, just outlaws, and the Jews ignored them. And as a matter of fact, they wouldn't even travel through Samaria. Simple point. If you look at a map, you look at where Galilee is in the north and Nazareth, and you can go, oh, the shortest way to get from Nazareth to Jerusalem is to go through Samaria. But they wouldn't. They literally crossed the Jordan River, and they would go through what's called Transjordan, which means on the other side of the Jordan River, go around, go down to Jericho, and then go up to Jerusalem. Why? Because that way they wouldn't have to face the Samaritans. All right. And they felt safer going that way, and they wouldn't have to cross into Samaritan land. But Jesus would, and he enjoyed doing that. Jesus went into a lot of places where the Jewish religion was in the minority, or had been forgotten, or there were other pagan populations. But he would do that. He would pop up there and into Samaria, and he would go a little, up further up. where we would call Lebanon, or close to the Lebanese border now. Uh, he went around. He got around. Very interesting. Okay, the way Jesus did things. So that kind of went off in a direction I didn't plan on taking right now. These gospels, though, they're definitely in a time and place. I mentioned that the first one that was written was from this Gospel of Mark, written in Rome, roughly around 68 AD. It's a very important time. First of all, it was right after the first persecutions from Emperor Nero, and right before the destruction of Jerusalem in the year 70. It was during a time when there was a rebellion going on for about 5 years, from the year 65 to 70. Part of the reason why there was the persecution of the Christians in Rome was because they were considered a Jewish group. And definitely when you're the leader, or the person they worship and adore as God, was a Jewish man named Yeshua, Jesus. They were persecuted partly because they were Jewish, a Jewish group, and the Jews were in active open rebellion in Israel, or in the Palestine area. And so that was part of the reason why it was easy to attack Christians, because they were just thought as a bunch of crazy Jews. So when Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans, because the rebellion went on for a few years because the Roman armies were busy elsewhere, fighting off enemies in the north mainly. But when they got done taking care of them, they came right down to deal with the rebellion, and they wiped everybody out. I mean, they destroyed the city. They leveled it completely, destroyed the walls. They left a few scattered animals and a bunch of, poor people, and otherwise just it was a complete destruction. The whole faith was gone because everything focused on the temple in Jerusalem, being able to go there and offer sacrifices according to the law of Moses. All the traditions were there, and every year Jerusalem was just full of Jews from all over the world for the big celebrations of Passover and of the Feast of Booths, or the Pentecost, 50 days after Passover, and then the beginning of the new year, the Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah. The town just filled with lots and lots of people. And it was always busy. It was a very busy city. It was, as the people from all over the world being there just to go to the temple. But now the temple's gone. The palace of the king is gone. The walls are gone. And so this Gospel of Mark was written right in that time of the rebellion, right before the destruction of Jerusalem, and after that first persecution by Nero. So if you read the Gospel of Mark, like I said, you can do it in one sitting. It's like a short story, very, very quick to read, easy to read, boom, 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 boom. You're going to get some very strong words of Jesus, warning you about the end of things, warning you to stay away from the government, okay? Don't mess with them. Don't cause trouble, all right? Just, your job is to speak this good news to as many people as you can. But don't trust a whole lot of people outside of the community of faith, because, people were actively attacking the Christians. So he's giving them what they needed to remember who they were so they could be able to distinguish maybe somebody coming in as a spy, you want to say, who was called a spy for now. Somebody coming in trying to subvert the true faith. So Mark wrote things down to say, no, this is the true stuff. Okay? Don't let anybody come in here and tell you otherwise, trying to spread lies. It was beginning to be a problem. Fake news, right? People were coming in, lying, and trying to destroy Christian communities. There actually were problems, big problems later on to cover 300-400 years, there was a lot of big problems just amongst the Christians about what they believed about who God was, and especially about who Jesus Christ is, right? So there was a lot of disagreement. But at the beginning, they were all in a group. They just understood he's the Son of God. He's both a man born of the Virgin Mary, and he is God from all eternity in one person. And so that there was no doubt about it. Later on, people would start overthinking things, and came up with other ideas, and it caused a lot of problems for the church. Still got them today. We still have some groups of Christians who deny that Jesus was a man or deny that Jesus was God. And we still have that in some of the groups that are out there knocking on your doors and stuff. They don't always believe what the church has always taught about who Jesus Christ is. But it took a while, because we had to figure things out. But really, in the beginning, they understood who he was. He was God in the flesh. Okay, so that's what the Gospel of Mark is really trying to get you to see. And so, at the beginning of the Gospel of Mark starts off with Jesus being baptized, and then he went to the temptations into the desert. 40 days, 40 nights, and then boom, he's running off. He's doing the work, and this is what he said and did. Boom, boom, boom. You go through it. There's some good stories in there, wonderful ones. It's wonderful to read. They're beautiful and nicely detailed conversations. One of the things that we noticed when we look at the oldest written text of the Gospel of Mark in Greek, was that the Greek that was used was a very common Greek. I'll just say 8th grade level. All right, 8th grade level. Like we talk about that. An 8th grade level of English. Pretty decent, but there's going to be grammatical mistakes. There's going to be errors. He doesn't use the best words, the biggest words. And sometimes he gets some, well, you have to know the old languages and how they used to conjugate verbs and how they used to have, the different, the peoples, whether it was singular or plural, and then what kind of, pronouns, what kind of pronoun to use. Was it a formal sense, an informal sense? Was it there's different things. And so Mark could get those confused because he wasn't the most greatest expert at English. At Greek. Fine. And when we actually translate, we try to translate the errors to keep the errors in there, in the grammatical errors, considering that we know how Greek was written in those times. We have plenty of Greek documents from 2,000 years ago, and very highly educated, wonderful Greek. And Greek was a very complicated language back in the day. And so you can see where the mistakes are. And so when we translate it, we keep those difficulties in there. You're not exactly sure, what is he talking? Who's he in this sentence? Who's the him? Who's the he? Who's the object? Who's the subject? It gets confusing sometimes. You have to be careful. So now that's how we as Catholics, when we translate the Bible, we do that. You're going to notice that in other Bibles that are not translated within the Catholic Church, they decide to fix the mistakes. But when they do that, they also tend to create a meaning, an interpretation that maybe they shouldn't have done that, because they're saying, no, it's got to be this way, when maybe it could have been some other way as well. We leave it open. And that's, where reading and studying and praying, talking about these scriptures is wonderful. Okay. So that's Gospel of Mark. Now, it's the second gospel in the order, because the next gospel was written, Gospel of Matthew, around the year 75 AD. We kind of ballpark, that's Definitely that it was there and being used in the communities of Jerusalem. You'd figure that Jerusalem would have a gospel beforehand. But I already gave you the answer to that. You didn't need a written book about what Jesus said and did because you had the guys who were there telling you what Jesus said and did. So you didn't really need to write it down. Probably people did write some things down and send it off and to somewhere else. That's great. Why was the necessity of actually creating a longer uh, narrative of the life of Jesus and what he said and did? I mentioned this because of the persecutions and time. It had been 40 years since Jesus died and rose from the dead, and so did people. They died. Some were killed, and some just died. And also, they had grown so fast. There were tens of thousands now, if not hundreds of thousands of Christians in that land. That, to be able to communicate everything correctly, it was tough to do in a panel discussion where you had a bunch of people sitting there. So, I remember this, I remember that, and that. It was easier for Matthew to sit down and write down a very well-structured remembrance of all that happened, how Jesus came into the world. I mean, the very first thing that Matthew does is he in the first chapter, you'll see it. He writes Jesus's ancestry down, starting with Abraham. Yeah. Oops, sorry. Bad habit of crunching ice. We'll do that again. Okay. So they wanted to show that what Abraham started was brought through all these thousands of years to show who Jesus is and that he's a blood relative. Okay. It's very interesting. You can do a lot of study about that genealogy because of certain characters some people that are mentioned and certain people that are not mentioned that are very famous. And then there's a lot of not so famous people as well. But it basically says that Jesus is a son of Joseph, who was the husband of Mary. Right? And that's it. I mean, then it says, and this is how his birth came about. While Joseph and Mary were betrothed, which means that they were wedded in a formal ceremony, but they didn't live together yet. Because they always had this trial period. After getting married, then they would still live separately with their families just to see if they can behave themselves. Give them a chance to get to know each other. And also, it was kind of a chance to make sure that you really wanted to stay married. It wasn't a trial period. They didn't play at being married. They were married, but they just didn't live together. So there was no sex. At least there was supposed to be sex, right? Okay. And what happened was sometimes because they were married, they would just sneak in and they just couldn't keep their hands off each other type thing. They couldn't wait to get together. But there was that period where the families could say it's off and no problem. I can simply say, I don't want to stay married to so-and-so. And there's no problem with it. You just return whatever money was exchanged or whatever property was exchanged as wedding gifts, as dowries and stuff like that. And it was done. And then there was the day, or if you wanted to stay together, then there was a day. And this could go on for a few months. It could go on for a year. It's usually just a few months. Just to make sure everybody was okay and make sure that nobody came out of the woodwork saying, wait a minute, I'm married to so-and-so. Or, hey, wait a second. We had an agreement that you're going to marry my daughter, or you're going to give your daughter to my son. And you're giving her to him? No. It's not going to, you can't do that. We got to settle this thing. All right. There's a lot of these verbal contracts that were done. I bring this out because the language in the gospel is very simple, very straightforward. While they were married, but before they lived together, Mary was found to be pregnant. And St. Matthew says, by the power of the Holy Spirit. Okay? All right. This is the straightforward church teaching from the very beginning of the church. It's not an add-on hundreds of years later. The church always knew and believed this is what they understood. Okay? And it just says Joseph was going to divorce her quietly because he was a just man, meaning that he would gain nothing from exposing her. And she's pregnant. It's not mine. I don't know who is. And basically hanging her out to dry, basically to be killed, basically be stoned. She says, who's the father? And Mary would have to say, God is thy father. He made me pregnant. Joseph was ready to let her go, but he's going to do it quietly because he didn't want to have her killed. He didn't want that blood on his hands. Just make a clean break of it. We're okay. You know, you go your way, I go my way. Nobody, I just don't want to marry you. And then you deal with your pregnancy on your own. But then that dream came in, and a lot of there's a new statue out. That's not brand new, but it's popular now, and because of Pope Francis mainly, where Joseph is sleeping, receiving the dream to accept Mary into his home. And almost immediately, Mary takes off to the hill country. Okay, but Matthew doesn't go into that part. All right, and then Jesus is born. And then it jumps into when Jesus was to be baptized, and he came to the river. So there's his whole life as a child, as a youth, just passed over, glossed. Okay, no mention is made of it. And then he comes to be baptized by John in the Jordan River. The Holy Spirit comes. He goes into the desert for the 40 days and 40 nights without eating or drinking anything out in the desert. Greatest line in the Bible. And after that, he was hungry. Okay, 40 days, 40 nights. He was beyond hungry. Okay, he was hallucinating. Well, that's kind of what happened. He had these visions, these three temptations from the devil, and they weren't hallucinations. Okay, because the devil only gets after you when you're at your weakest. So if you decide to do 40 days and 40 nights of fasting, good luck. All right, we do not recommend that. Whenever the most we actually tell people to do a prolonged time of fasting is if you give up something and eat less or whatever, but you only do it for a month at the most, but you're still eating something and drinking something. You don't go without that. You're just giving up on other stuff. So, during Lent, you can do a lot of fasting that way. And sometimes it's better just, do the fast during the day, and then at nighttime you have something to eat and drink. So your body doesn't, go into a terrible shock, because it can throw your body into shock. All right. So when you do those things, though, like now during Lent, a lot of people tell me, they gave up the soda pop, the chips, and the donuts, coffee. They gave up all sorts of stuff, right? And boy, they're having a hard time of it. They get attacked. We're easy targets. We're easy targets because we think we're doing something good to make ourselves better or whatever. But in reality, no, we're leaving ourselves open to attacks by the devil, because he comes after us like that. So imagine Jesus after 40 days and 40 nights, he's just out there and he's praying. He's quiet to himself. And then the attacks hit. These really powerful temptations from the devil. Yeah, very, very important to see them, understand them, okay? Because good now because we started Lent with those temptations. That we always do. We always talk about those temptations in the Gospel of Matthew uh, because it's our experience of everyday life. Like I said, when you try to do something good, the devil hits you. What's the famous thing? The most famous thing that comes to across my desk every single day. This man and woman have been, they've been together for all these years. They have kids, they have their family and everything. Maybe they got married, in the courthouse. They went to Vegas or whatever, and they got the civil license. But now they want to get married in the church, and everybody says, "Don't do it, because if you do, you'll be divorced in 6 months." And it's true. You know why? Because for all those years that you were living without having your marriage given to God, consecrated to God, you know, by being embraced by the church to receive all of its protections, the devil didn't bother with you because you were not glorifying God. You were glorifying yourself. Okay? And you could even be going to church, but you were still pushing him away because you wouldn't go into the church. You wouldn't be prepared by the church and blessed, consecrated to be a marriage. Because you can always, if and the other way, if you weren't married in the church, you can just simply say, don't like you anymore. I'm divorcing you. I'm out of here. I want to marry so and so. And you can go, even after spending 20 years married to one person, you can get divorced and then you get married in the church to somebody else. Okay? You see what I'm talking about here? It's disingenuous. And it's not glorifying God fully. And when a couple wants to, the devil goes, "Oh, I got these guys. I'm going to mess them up. I'm going to make them regret getting married in the church." And that's what happens. And I warn people. I says, he's going to attack. Just be ready. Stay together. Pray. God's got you. You're going to really you didn't want to trust God in the beginning. You wanted to go off and get married for whatever reason. Got pregnant, or you really weren't interested in a church wedding. You didn't want to go through the preparation program. The priest was a jerk, because we can be jerks. All right. Whatever happens, you just say no. You don't want to. God's way is too tough. All right. And the devil's going to come back. He's going to hit you. And you're going to go, "Oh man, God, what are you doing to me? I'm trying to do what's right here, right? And you're messing with me." He says, "No, no, 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 no. You're learning. You're learning to trust God by being tempted, persecuted, whatever's going to happen. But you stick to it. You stay. You get married in the church. You hold on to each other. You hold on to God. You hold on to the sacraments. You take communion a lot. You do whatever comes up." Okay? I got too many stories. I've been doing this for 32 years almost. It's like, it's all full of the stories. So I'm going to ease off on this, okay? That part anyway. But those temptations come when you're trying to do your most and the best. This is an answer to the young lady, I forgot which one, who came up after class asking her, "You talk more about what Lent is and all these other things," because I've been doing certain sacrifices she's doing, and I just kind of listened to her and going, "Okay, how's it been going for you?" Says, "Okay, so think about that, okay, because this is it. Because she's making extra sacrifices, things are happening. On the one hand, God has given her great blessing and perseverance. She can do it. She can do the sacrifice that she promised to do, and He is blessing her in many ways. But the devil is also out there, just attacking. Okay, I'm putting a lot of emphasis on the temptations because now Mark, in the Gospel of Mark, he does mention the temptations, but not as detailed as as the Gospel of Matthew does. And why? It's because Matthew sees that the temptations, hearing the full story, not that Jesus was tempted, but how he was tempted, through his belly, through having, you know, presuming on the protection of God, that presumptuousness of being a good person means that I should always be blessed and never have to suffer. And then the third temptation, power. I can decide the destiny of everybody. And Jesus, though he was God, he's get away from you, Satan. Right? Be Satan, huh? Get away from me. The temptation was there, as it is for all of us. Because now you will see through the rest of the Gospel of Matthew, he goes into long sections, like chapter 5, 6, and 7. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. It's the first one, because then later on in 8, 9, 10, there's a shorter one, Sermon on the Mount. It's a different kind, but they're all going at the same thing. Okay, you're going to be tempted. We're living in a different way. This is a different way to live. An example from the Gospel from Matthew chapter 5. Jesus says, you have heard it said that you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. It doesn't say that ever in Scripture, but that's what people hear from other people. And Jesus says, do good to your enemy. You shall love your enemy. And do good to those who persecute you. And everybody's just like, you're nuts. Complete counterintuitive. Because he lets them know that no, because what you're being asked to do is to live a righteousness, a way of goodness, that is the way your heavenly Father is, the way he treats you and me. And we're not good. We're sinners. We hurt each other. We fail. And yet he loves us and blesses us. And that's what we have to be like. We have to be like him. And the whole thing about adultery. You have heard, do not commit adultery. Well, I tell you, even if you look at a woman with lust in your heart, lust in your eyes, sorry, you have already committed adultery in your heart. Forget it. I'm dead. I'm gone. Blind me now. Trust me, it won't work. It won't help. You can be as blind as anything. Us guys, we're bad. Okay? You can just hear her voice and you go nuts. Okay? All right? But what he's telling you is fight it. You see it, you look, he says, don't turn it into something bad. Fight it. Okay? Don't give in to it. Because it's very easy to give into it. Men would just, they might be married and have a wife, but they would also have things on the side, one or two. They might even have kids, from other women. As long as they can pay for them, fine. They can even marry many times, have many wives at the same time. And Jesus is saying, no, 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 no. Okay. I really got into talking about the Gospel of Matthew. This is going to be a two-parter, no doubt, because I'm already at 40 minutes. The rest of the Gospel of Matthew, there's a lot of miracle stories and stuff, and different teachings and miracle stories mixed in with there. But it's all leading up to what's going to happen at the end of the Gospel. And this is an important thing for all four of the Gospels. Their real focus, the real purpose, is to help us understand why Jesus went to the cross. Why did he do it? Okay, that's what they all wanted to really communicate. The four Gospels. Why did Jesus want to go to the cross? He was willing to do it, wanting to in a sense of, I really don't want to die. I don't want to suffer, please don't let me die. Don't, if I don't have to do that this way, if there's another way, let's do it. Okay. But he wanted to, in the sense of, if it's going to do what it needs to do, then this is what must be done. And we murdered him. I mean, we killed him. We decided that he was going to have to die. We made that decision. We didn't have to, but we did. The people who were there, our ancestors who were there, who could have stopped this whole thing. Everyone from Pontius Pilate to the chief priest to the high priest, everybody on the ground. Judas Iscariot, he didn't have to turn Jesus in. You know, Peter and the guys, they could have just died with him, you know, or kidnapped him and gotten him out of town, whatever. But they didn't do it. You know, it didn't happen that way. What happened was Jesus was willing to go to the cross because he knew what would happen. He knew what would happen for us, that he would die and we would lose heart and we would fall into despair. And then he would rise. And then we would see him risen from the grave. And then game on. It was really, from then on, it's time. There's good news. The victory. Okay. All right. So I'm going to stop here for now. So I'll make another video one of these days, continuing on about the four gospels, because they're very important. But just take that last point, is very important. That all four are written to point to the cross. Why did Jesus go to the cross? Okay. All right, gang. Take it easy. I'll catch you later. Next video. Bye.